Accessibility is a right, not a privilege. Every individual, regardless of physical, cognitive, or sensory abilities, deserves access to spaces, services, information, and opportunities. Breaking Barriers for Inclusive Manitoba connects with real people to hear about their lives, challenges, and solutions to creating a more inclusive Manitoba for all.
My name is Darrin Luke, and I am a training coordinator at Manitoba Possible. So what my job entails is going out to different organizations, such like you Multicultural today, and talking about accessibility and inclusion and disability.
Okay, so I definitely want to talk about the different work and stuff that you do in terms of Manitoba Possible. But just to start on that accessibility angle, because, for a lot of people who think about disabilities, they might instantly think about just physical limitations, physical disabilities, such as like, oh, let's put up a ramp, those automatic door openers. But it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it is. So a lot of people, when they think about accessibility, they think about those physical barriers like you were talking about, like ramps or elevators or even, like curbs and things like that. But it goes a lot farther than that. So there's also attitudinal barriers, and those are usually the hardest ones to break down. And those the cultures that people have. It could be older people, it could be people coming from different countries when it comes to accessibility. And those are the things that part of my job is trying to break down those attitudinal barriers at the same time as well.
Do you have any examples of those attitudinal barriers of what that might look like for someone who's unfamiliar?
So it could be simple as things like stereotypes, assuming that people with disabilities are incapable of certain things like, even housework or sports, things like that. It could be things like generalizations, assuming, that somebody who uses a wheelchair like myself is the same as everybody else that uses a wheelchair, when in reality that's very different depending on where your spinal cord injury is attained. All sorts of different things like that. Overprotecting, that would be an example of, people overprotecting people with disabilities because of afraid of them getting hurt. And a good example of that is I play a sport called sledge hockey, very, very physical sport, full contact sport, broken many, many bones, but it doesn't stop me from playing because I'm still an athlete, still a person, just do things in a little bit of a different way.
Get a little bit more into the weeds that you touched on there, but through Manitoba Possible, you're talking about those education aspects. When you're going into an organization or business to talk about accessibility, what are some of those key points that you touch on when you're coming in?
So what I normally do, especially with organizations, and I talk a lot about customer service.
Mm-hmm.
So that's talking about, interacting with people with disabilities. So it could be people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It could be people who are blind with low vision, people with mobility disabilities. That's what we primarily touch on because it's what people see the most. Mm-hmm. But we also talk about, people with neurodivergent disabilities as well, and those invisible disabilities too that people may not see. So those could be, people with heart conditions, people with things like ALS, things like that you don't necessarily see outwardly, but do exist.
I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the years as well. Someone who utilizes a wheelchair, there's a variety of different reasons why someone would use one. Like you're saying, some might have a spinal cord injury. Some might have like chronic fatigue or things like that where they can't stand up for a long period of time. And then when someone sees them standing, they're like, hey, why do you need that chair? I just saw you walk a little bit.
And that happens a lot. I mean, I'm a person that, because I'm a person who uses a wheelchair, I'm always checking to see if people have passes. If a person has a pass, I'll never say anything to them because, again, of those invisible disabilities, you don't know what's going on with inside that person. If it's a person who doesn't have a pass, and is parking in a spot, I'm always very polite about it. But I'm saying, hey, maybe think about parking somewhere else just because you're using a spot that could be used for somebody else. And that's an important part of that disability advocacy.
When you're coming in and you're giving your presentations to people, what are some of the most common questions?
It depends on which organizations I'm doing. So one of my favorite places to go is to go to schools. And then you get the young kids, right? And they're innocent, and they'll ask any type of question, right? So they'll ask me, how do you go to the bathroom, or how do you go have a shower, and all those different types of things. And those are the ones that I really truly like to answer because they're innocent. And then you can start at the grassroots. That's the best one. And then in other organizations, people ask similar questions as well, just kind of on a little bit of a higher level. How did you attain your disability? What kind of things does it, or how does it affect you? And those are the major questions that I usually get.
When you're touching on it before, the protective aspect, everyone wants to help out. In a situation where you see someone with a visible disability, what would be the appropriate way of approaching and, asking if someone needs help?
And that's exactly it, is you always want to ask before you assume.
Yeah, you don't want to just go in there and grab someone's
and that's exactly it. I have a really good example of that. So I was in Polo Park about 8 or 10 years ago, and I was getting into my car, and I'm able to drive with hand controls. So I was taking my chair apart. I'd already put my wheels in my car, and then I was just going to pick up the frame and already sitting in the driver's seat. I had a gentleman asked if I wanted help, and when it comes to my chair, putting it in the car, I often say no, very politely, obviously. Because I have just a very specific way of doing it. And I don't know whether it was a communication issue or that it was a language barrier, and he just wasn't really listening to me. So what he tried to do was he tried picking up the frame of my chair and tried shoving it through the driver's side door where I was already sitting there. And he clipped me across the chin with my own frame of my chair and cut me for about 4 stitches. So I had to get a little more forceful at that point. And say, no, I'm fine, thank you, and then proceeded obviously to go to Grace Hospital for 4 stitches. But it's just, asking. And that's the biggest thing that we, as people with disabilities, want people to do is ask. Ask if you need help, ask if you have questions, rather than, shushing people, especially kids. Ask, because then more often than not, people will tell you what they need or how they need help. And that's the biggest thing.
Well, I guess it's that continual normalization, right? And things have developed and changed, and we've learned more about, the variety and spectrum that comes with disability. But, of course, those conversations need to continue, continuing to normalize it, to have it where they see someone they think might need help, to ask. And when someone says no, to be like, okay, no worries.
Yeah, for sure. And something that we talk about, particularly when it comes to, creating new spaces or consultations and things like that, what we do is we ask that those organizations ask people with disabilities what they need when it comes to those different types of things. So often you can get a group of people with disabilities together and provide an opportunity for them to provide advice. So particularly for me as a person in a wheelchair, it would be, bathrooms, things like that. What would you need? Often it's large spaces, it's sinks inside the bathrooms. It would be, grab bars, all those different types of things. And then if you can get that large sampling of people, people again that are mobility issues, and people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and people who are blind or low vision, neurosensory people, and they can provide all sorts of different types of advice that a person who doesn't have a disability really wouldn't think about.
Well, there's a lot of things I take for granted. I mean, just in terms of, this isn't necessarily tied to disability, but in terms of male versus female privilege of walking outside at night sometimes, where people are like, ooh, the sun starts going down, I get a little nervous. And I'm like, what? Why would you be concerned? It's one of those things that I never think about. And if you don't have any of those lived experiences, sometimes you're like, oh, yeah, that is something I should think about a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's as simple as, for example, when my spouse moved in with me in my house, I always have my plates and my cups and things like that in lower counters. And when she moved in with me, she was always taking the stuff and putting it up in the higher counters because that's just her reality. And then sometimes I just have to remind her, he says, would you mind, keeping it down low, or placing the salt and pepper shaker on a lower counter so I can reach it. And it's reminding people, or just really educating people about those different types of things. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times. And again, I have no fault with people who don't have experience with people with disabilities, because it's just their culture or their frame of reference. And like I said, it's just education.
Touching on that education aspect and, continuing to break down those barriers, Manitoba Possible doing a ton of different programs and initiatives. Why don't you walk through some of those for us, please?
Sure, I can list off quite a few that we have, pretty much all of them. So we have a deaf and hard of hearing services. We have a newcomer navigation support services, self-help clearinghouse, children's services coordination, employment preparation, parking permit program, community education and training. That's where I work. Manitoba Wheelchair Program, Recreation, Leisure, and Accessible Sport, Northern Employment Services, Community Center and Children, Provincial Outreach Therapy, Children, and Vocational Services. And then we just recently created a new one called Care Possible, which basically helps people who need support people. And they can basically go onto a website and find people that can fit their schedules. That one's been a huge one, particularly for people with support people, because sometimes it can be really difficult to find the right type of support people at the right hours and things like that as well.
When you're looking at, developing programs through Manitoba Possible, how do you decide what are the different areas that need supports, that need programs and services?
I think it's based through need, really, right? We specialize in a lot of different areas, and then other areas are left to other places. So, for example, this is a CNIB, so we don't deal a lot with people who are blind or low vision. It's not saying that we wouldn't help serve them or direct them in the right area, but it's just these are the programs that have been around for quite a long time. And Manitoba Possible is celebrating its 75th year this year. And basically, we came out of a wartime program, right? So we were helping veterans that were coming back from the First World War and the Second World War. And it just eventually started to grow and grow and grow from there. And the programs just developed as need came through.
Talking about those needs and, 75 years of an organization, that's a long time. Let's look at just a little bit, maybe over just the past decade when we're looking at accessibility in the myriad of different forms that it takes. What do you think are some of the most significant changes or developments that you've seen in terms of accessibility here? Let's just look here in Winnipeg.
Sure. For one of the programs that I'm involved in is one of our recreation, leisure, and accessible sport programs. I've only been with Manitoba Possible for just almost 3 years now, but I've been involved with this recreation, leisure, accessible sport program for almost 15. So it was originally started by, the sledge hockey program that we have was originally started by one of our gentlemen. He's recently retired. His name is Bill Malloyne. And he originally saw sledge hockey through one of the Women's Worlds programs when it came here to Winnipeg, as they were playing at the old arena. And what he envisioned was seeing an accessible sledge hockey program for adults and kids. And I've seen that program grow from being very small to originally 6 people to almost 100 athletes now. And the evolution of it has increased invariably. We've put 3 female athletes on the national podium, the national stage. So they're working to get to the Olympics or the Paralympics. We've had probably at least 10 male athletes to go to national development camps. And that's been a massive growth of just athletes from anywhere from 6 years old to athletes like myself. We're turning 48 years old today. So that's been a massive change in that one, and super, super beneficial for really everybody.
In terms of that kind of a sports and recreation aspect, the growth and development of that, do you think that's tied to, advocacy within community?
Very much so. So when we first started, we had quite a few kind of barriers and roadblocks that we really had to go through. So the city of Winnipeg was hesitant to let us on their ice because of the picks that we use on our sticks to allow us to move. So they're the best way I can explain is it kind of looks like a figure skating pick, and you use it to gain traction when you're pushing. And yes, it does do some damage to the ice. So it was kind of a little bit of a fight at first with some of the ice makers. Eventually got to the point where they realized, just a couple floods will fix that, no problem. True North was actually one of the best advocates for us. So they would actually let us go to the MTS center at the time and actually use their ice, despite it being a professional rink. And they were really, really helpful with that and helped advocate for us in that way. So that was really, really quite nice.
Are there some other examples that you've noticed over the past couple of years of, development in accessibility?
Well, originally, I mean, we had the what we call the Human Rights Code, right? So the Human Rights Code wasn't a vehicle for people with disabilities to really provide them with access to goods and services, right? So if they were having issues and accessing things that they needed to do, they could make a complaint. But the only problem with the Human Rights Code is it only really fixes the problem for that one person at a time. So in 2013, the Government of Manitoba created the AMA, which is the Accessibility Manitoba Act. And that's been a massive change in 5 major components. So it's transportation, customer service, design of public spaces, information and communication. And basically what that's done is it's really opened up that accessibility of making sure that people have the things they need. And that's been a huge opening for people with accessibility.
So when we're looking at accessibility and, making spaces more accommodating, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing or some of the instances where things need to go further? One example would be looking at rural locations, funding for, places far outside of Winnipeg, because I know, visiting smaller towns or cities, sometimes a lot of places are not up to standards.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. It's all based on funds, right? And that's the thing, especially when it comes to those physical barriers. I was recently up in Thompson in October, and I had never seen Pisu Falls. And it's a beautiful, beautiful area. So my friend and I, or my coworkers, stopped off at Pisu Falls, and we were like, we were asking a couple of people, like, do you know exactly where it is? And they're like, yes. And it turns out that it's actually accessible now. So what they've done is they've created some small pea-sized gravel that makes it easier to get down. It's still pretty steep. I was able to get down there with a little bit of help. But yeah, it is accessible, and they've got viewing decks to see it and everything like that. So that's an extreme example of, going up 8 hours north, right? Same thing here in the city. It's just, dealing with the city would be an example of some of their Transit Plus programs. So they're making the effort to try and make it accessible for people, particularly like a day-to-day, where we've got, close to 20 centimeters snow coming. That makes it really difficult for people to access transit. So Transit Plus, you will take somebody from their home to the place they want to go and back again. But they're experiencing some issues with accessibility and some of the drivers. So Manitoba Possible was providing consultation on how to kind of improve that. So I just recently, as of last week, or actually sort of this week, did some training with some of the drivers and provided, customer service ideas on how to interact with people with disabilities. And that's opening up. And there's all sorts of organizations and schools and things like that that are coming to us now, and without us having to chase people. And that's where we see the benefits of this and the AMA as well. That people are really starting to see that accessibility is important.
Just in the the conversation about accessibility. Yeah, you mentioned they're like not having to chase down people anymore, but sometimes things slip through the cracks. Unfortunately, what was it? When the Winnipeg City budget was released, they were talking about, we're only gonna start removing snow after what is it, 15, 30? I can't even remember
I
the
think,
amount.
yeah, I think it was after 15 or 20 centimeters or something like that.
It's one of those things that it's like, oh yeah, I can see why that would be an issue for people when on residential roads, all of a sudden, snow is not being removed as often.
And that's extremely difficult. So, I mean, when we have, Transit Plus, it's beneficial, but in a winter city, it really does kind of handcuff people when it comes to people with mobility issues, really any type of disability. Because, like I said, snow really does stop people from being able to get out and do the things that they want to do. So sidewalks, for example, we're actually one of the only cities in Canada that actually still plows their sidewalks, which is really quite nice. But it's kind of far and few between sometimes. And again, it can be really difficult to even plow through 5 or 6 centimeters of snow. Whereas if you're in the summertime, one push will take you 15 feet. Whereas if you're in the snow, one push will take you a couple of inches. And that's the difficult part of it.
I guess another thing is like we're living in a world where progress is being made. People are becoming more aware. Like you said, you're not having to chase down people as much to do things. Accessibility options out in Thompson, 8 hours from here. There's a lot of stuff happening down in the States. And one of the big conversations is they are talking about, DEI and adding A and like accessibility on there, that apparently accessibility and accommodating people is becoming a problem.
Well, and that's the funny thing is that the United States developed their ADA, which is called their American Disabilities Act, and that was actually developed in 1990, and it's a really, really strong piece of legislation. First, I have no idea why they're getting rid of their DEI stuff and their diversity and equity and inclusion. That I don't understand, but the ADA is extremely strong, and I think mainly because of the veterans that are coming back from, the wars and they're injured and things like that. But if you go to anywhere like even Grand Forks, you can see that they have very wide spaces when it comes to their parking spots. Their bathrooms are done quite well. Their hotels usually have at least 3 or 4 hotel rooms that are really considered disabled rooms. Because often when you go to a hotel, like for example, when I was up in Thompson, they said the room was accessible. That meant the first floor. When I got into the room, immediately the toilet was right in front of me. My sink was to the left, and then the door opened towards the tub. So I would have to transfer from my chair to the toilet, and then from the toilet to the tub, and then do that all reverse. So that's 6 transfers just to have one shower. So things are slowly getting there. And I am the type of person where I believe like it's never going to happen all at once, but as long as the efforts are there to kind of start it, that's what really matters to me. Some advocates tend to be a little more forward, like a little more pushy towards it. I'm just happy to see that there's that offer there at least now too, and that the government has taken this as something that's considered to be important.
Yeah, I guess just your thoughts on that. They had that robust accessibility legislation, but it feels like they're starting to potentially pull back on some of that conversation.
And I can't really understand what's going on in the United States right now. I mean, I'm not a politicized person, but even here in Canada, things are kind of going sort of weird too, right? So, um, if they start pulling that back, I'm assuming they're going to get a big pushback from the veterans and the veteran associations there. But yeah, it's a bit of a crapshoot in the States right now.
Well, I think it just kind of proves the point, whether it's, any terms of standing up for different minority communities, is the continued effort to, promote and advocate for those things.
And very much. And Manitoba Possible is really forward thinking when it comes to that as an organization. We really think that, diversity and inclusion and accessibility should be at the forefront of everything. And that's what drives our organization, right? So all our executives are on board when it comes to that. And in our buildings, we have accessible features wherever they need them. So we have automatic door openers. We've got accessible bathrooms. We have strobe lights for our deaf individuals when it comes to our fire alarms, because obviously they can't hear them. So those are always really, really important. And our executive manager is great at that.
How can someone, let's go from, for someone who is interested in learning more and reaching out to have that education aspect or wanting to help out and support Manitoba Possible, how can they do that?
They can always just contact me because I'm actually the accessibility officer at Manitoba Possible as well. So if they wanted to contact me, I have an email. It's dluke@manitobapossible.ca. I welcome emails. I quite enjoy them, and we will try and answer your emails as soon as possible, usually within 24 to 48 hours, depending on the complexity. But we will do our best.
Before we wrap up things here, is there anything else that you would like to touch on in terms of accessibility, advocacy, and conversations that we maybe not have touched on here?
The only thing I just want to really touch on when it comes to that is for people to really understand that we're not trying to make things difficult for people. We're just wanting the same rights that everybody else has, right? And that's what really matters. I mean, it's easy for somebody to climb a flight of stairs, right? But if that flight of stairs doesn't have an elevator attached to it or doesn't have an escalator, then that makes it really difficult for us to be able to access the same things that everybody else does. And I'll give you just a very good example of that. So when they built the Winnipeg, the new Bombers Stadium, they created accessible seating. But what they did was when some of that accessible seating, there's not enough of it. And a lot of the accessible seating is always super high, so you can't get to the same places that other people are in. Or there's gates that sit up really high, so you actually have to kind of lift yourself up to look over top of the gated area. The Jets have done a really good job with it, again, but sometimes they just need a little more accessible seating. So those different types of things to make sure that people have access to the same things that everybody else should. That's what I really want people to understand.
Breaking Barriers for Inclusive Manitoba is focused on raising awareness and taking action to prevent and remove accessibility barriers. This initiative is proudly in partnership with Accessibility Manitoba, working together for a more inclusive future.